Thanks for joining. Just by way of an introduction, for some of you who might not know me, my name is Julie Gilbert. I have a background in health services research and a PhD from the Institute of Health Policy Management and Evaluation from the University of Toronto. I worked for many years in the public sector as a scientist, an evaluator, and I had lots of experience with talking about impact and measuring impact, and I bring that with me today. Here's a slide that just talks a little bit about an overview of today's session. A little bit of introduction by way of myself and my background, and we're going to look at the question, why is everyone thinking about impact? You might see the word pop up in many different contexts. And so we're going to look at it from three different perspectives, three different sectors, including the public sector, the nonprofit charitable sector, as well as the private sector. And we'll do these in turn. Then there'll be a short pause and a final section on applying impact in your setting, and specifically some preliminary steps on how you might approach impact measurement in your own context. Impact has a lot of different meanings to different people, but there is an overarching sense of more of a focus on impact as people from all sectors, companies, industries are really turning towards this as sort of a driver. According to Forbes, there's something that's afoot called an impact revolution, and which is advancing a vision of doing well while doing good and doing measurable good. So this notion of doing well by doing good is something that we'll revisit a little bit. It seems to be fueled by a generation of millennials who, at risk of sort of overgeneralizing, we can tend to be skeptical as well as empathetic at the same time. So these two sort of forces have combined to bring impact into sharper focus and have it more of an imperative. Meanwhile, on the public's side, we're all demanding greater social responsibility from corporations. People are investing with social returns in mind, and we're enforcing checks and balances with regards to how companies, how associations, how industries are conducting themselves, because there's more of an imperative to be responsible to and responsive to social factors. So Stanford University has a strong focus on social impact. And we focus on social impact because oftentimes when we talk about impact in the public domain, it's social impact that we mean. And social impact is the change, and it can be either positive or negative for people and communities, which happens as a result of a deliberate activity or service. So it's what we want to see change by doing the things that we do. So this is broad, and there's a lot of aspects of how our work can impact on society. There are many different frameworks that are around. One such lens on social impact is called ESG, or environmental, social, and governance considerations. So in environmental, we know that people are obviously concerned about climate change, by the biodiversity in our global system, in our ecosystem, and the impact that virtually anyone can have on environmental factors. From a social point of view, we're focused on equity, inclusion, and diversity. We're focused on human rights. We're focused on equal opportunity, customer responsibility, customer experience. And so a lot of these tap into how we feel we can impact, or we might impact, society at large. And then from a governance point of view, especially when it comes to the private sector, but not exclusively, business ethics, compliance, and board independence, we see issues surrounding governance come up time and time again. So we all understand that the way we carry ourselves and conduct our business, and the way that governance plays a large role in that is hugely important. And we have to be cognizant of where we have impact on those things. So I'm going to venture down 3 different avenues right now, 3 different perspectives that will help illustrate how we're currently thinking about impact. First is the public sector. And when I say public sector, I mean truly those government-funded agencies, be they hospitals, public schools, universities, colleges. And depending on what organization we're talking about, obviously they'll have a different impact orientation. It'll have different drivers and different missions. But what unites them all is that they have those. They are there to deliver certain things, to have a certain impact. Hospitals are there to treat folks who are unwell, to provide intervention, and to really improve the state of health in their communities. Public schools have a mandate to deliver education to our youth, university and colleges, to provide people with higher education. And so the mandate is in place, but it's not sufficient, and it's not, and the definition of impact is growing, it's broadening. And an example of this, an example of sort of a mandate within the public sector, is this dashboard. So the content of the cells is not important. This is a dashboard from the Cancer System Quality Index. Some of you might recognize it. It's published every year, and it really indicates or tries to monitor the quality of care that's delivered by our cancer system in Ontario. And so we can see, there are 4 different sort of areas: cancer burden, diagnosis, treatment, and end of life, facets of cancer care that we're interested in. And largely these indicators, some of the cells are empty, which means we don't have the ability to measure those things yet. And some of them are outcome measures, survival rates, stage at diagnosis, but many of the other indicators here are process measures. They're visits, emergency department visits. They are visits to the emergency departments at end of life, readmissions after surgery, even types of treatment delivered at the end of life. So what we come away with is a sense that we're not able to capture outcomes to the extent that we would like to. And outcomes are really a way of gauging impact. And as it says at the bottom, and this is quoted from the report itself, cancer recurrence and patient quality of life are important cancer outcomes, 2 of the most important outcomes. However, we lack these data. And so even in large, well-resourced entities and systems within the public sector, they lack the ability to gauge their actual impact on the outcomes that they want to have. And then there's something else happening in the public sector, which is of interest and relevant to impact. And that is some less obvious ways in which the public sector is impacting on our world. And these have to do with environmental, they have to do with social, and they have to do with governance considerations. So for example, the greening of the hospitals, the greening of the OR, so environmental considerations when it comes to hospital operations, or even what goes on in the operating room, all the waste and all the the carbon footprint of these large public sector organizations. So that's becoming more and more top of mind. The racism that exists in our medical system or in schools, and the social injustice also coming to the fore. And what this means is that these public sector entities are having unintended impacts on society. and they're worth paying attention to. They're worth measuring, and certainly there's imperative to try to do something about them. So impact in its broadest sense has applicability even in these institutions that have a relatively clear mandate. So this has happened to the extent that organizations that really guide evaluation and monitoring of impacts and outcomes have started to build initiatives like the Footprint Evaluation Initiative, which is interesting, of course, to me as an evaluator, that it really promotes incorporating environmental sustainability into all evaluations. And so a recognition, and this is not only pertinent to the public sector, but really any program or organization that's being evaluated, that there are movements and certainly imperatives to start measuring environmental sustainability alongside the outcomes or the impacts that an organization is intended to have. So we're going to move on now to our next perspective, moving away from the public sector to community nonprofits. And when I say community nonprofits, I mean to say actual nonprofits that operate at the grassroots or the community level, but also the foundations, the charities, the fundraising entities that operate alongside and support these nonprofits in a critical way. So we think about United Way, think about Red Cross, World Vision, etc. And it's interesting to note that among these entities, so the large philanthropic organizations like United Way, so this is the homepage from United Way of America, where we see impact front and center. They talk about impact on their homepage, top line of their homepage. It's inescapable that this organization is sharply focused on its impact. And this is signaled by United Way. Similar signals with the prominence of impact clearly displayed. We see that with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, large philanthropic organization out of the US, the McConnell Family Foundation in Canada, and the Movember Foundation, who admittedly, full disclosure, have been a client of mine, very focused on impact and the way they are delivering changes in people's lives, because their mandate is not only to fund activity, but it's also to make an impact and change the way people survive and thrive after health events or cancer or mental health. And this movement towards that focus on impact is well supported by the public. So these are data from a very recent poll indicating that over half, 65% of the public that were surveyed look to support charities that clearly communicate their impact. So it's important to donors out there in the public. And the vast majority of Canadians, 92% of those surveyed, expect charities to invest in measuring and reporting the impact of their work. It's an expectation, and this actually is a little bit of a sea change from some thinking that used to exist around the overhead and the operational costs of charities and philanthropies. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that. The conventional wisdom or the myth that existed was that a not-for-profit must have low overhead costs. Well, at the end of the day, how does an organization achieve its mission if it doesn't have enough money to pay the bills, the rent, the salaries, or skilled individuals who will help both measure and manage the impact that it has? So there is a move away from judging charities on the basis of their overhead, their administrative costs. As we see here, a large billboard put up in the US that really, encourages us to think about impact as opposed to overhead. I have to say that, this caused a little bit of a stir, it caused some chatter in the philanthropic world, but this is the way that things seem to be moving. So now we'll turn to the last sector that I wanted to highlight, and that is the private sector and investors within the sector who are the engine that shareholders being the largest sort of source of accountability in the private sector, and a whole industry unto themselves. There's impact funds, there investor funds, there are organizations for investment management that have cropped up, and it's among these organizations where we see a fair amount of change. Such that, for instance, we see investment firms starting to move towards better consideration of social impact. And here's a rating scheme that has been applied to impact firm or investment firms that, some of which don't have consideration and aren't really intending or don't intentionally incorporate impact into their investment strategies and decisions, all the way up to level 4, where they're providing capital that can flex, that can change according to the degree to which an investee is able to achieve its mission or have an impact the way that it's designed to. So where is this coming from, this sort of move towards consciousness of impact within the private sector? Well, a few years ago, there was a meeting of the Business Roundtable. And the Business Roundtable is a collection of CEOs, basically a collective of CEOs from about 200 of the largest publicly traded companies in the US. And these, the CEOs got together, and there was a statement that was issued around the intention for companies to serve their shareholders, but also deliver value to their customers, their employees, and deal fairly with suppliers, and importantly, support the communities in which they operate. So the issuance of this statement 3 years ago was a bit of a sea change in the investing community, because there was now clearly an imperative to consider what's called stakeholderism alongside shareholderism, and really taking a broader view of the impact that companies have on people and the planet. So to the extent that, so this is just an example of how this plays out, we're used to the bottom line being the financial outcomes on the part of an organization. The detail here aren't really important. It's just the fact that there's this now double bottom line where companies are taking into account sustainability, environmental outcomes alongside financial outcomes, again, signaling that there's a big change going on in the mentality within the private sector. Here's a snapshot of a report from our RBC in Canada, where they have publicly made available their impact measurement framework. So not only making statements around impact, the impact that they have had or the impact that they seek to have, but really being quite transparent about how they're going to go about and measure that impact. All right, so we're going to put a toe in the water on impact measurement. We're not going to explore it in depth, but this is a bit of an introduction. The first piece that I wanted to share with you is sort of a framework around thinking about intended impact on the path towards measuring it. And the common, a common tool that's used in impact measurement in, I could say all across all of the sectors that we talked about today is a theory of change. So a theory of change is a way of depicting what an organization does, the activities, and what changes they're intended to affect. And then in between, there's all sorts of intermediary steps that can speak to outputs or early short-term change or long-term or medium-term outcomes. But the questions that filter into a theory of change are also really important to consider, and they speak to outcomes, what outcomes an organization is trying to achieve, or I should say a program. And sometimes we talk about a program logic model that's very much akin to a theory of change. For whom are the impacts intended, and when, what's the time frame, and what impact are we going to hold ourselves accountable to, then work on depicting all of the activities and the intermediate outcomes that go on to fully developing a theory of change. So that's an important tool. And there's lots of handbooks and guides available. And part of what I do with some of my clients is to help curate some of that information, because not all of it is applicable to any given organization. And so one size does not fit all, but there's lots of different permutations and combinations of a theory of change that we can put together. So once a theory of change is determined or developed, we can then start to think about measurement, and impact can be measured across 5 dimensions. This is where we'll see it starting to differ from actual outcomes. It's a little bit more broad and a little bit more all-encompassing than simply outcomes. So the what dimension is important because it talks about which outcomes, are they positive or negative? How important are they to the people or the planet experiencing them? Who experiences them? And who are the people who are affected? Who are the stakeholders? Are they underserved? Are they the intended targets, or are they other people who are unintentionally affected? How much of the outcome is occurring, the scale, the depth, the duration, and then contribution. This is an important aspect of impact because it speaks to whether the change would have happened anyways. How much of the change can we attribute to the activity that was done? How much has it contributed? And then the risk, in other words, what is the risk to people or planet that the impact doesn't occur? So this is sort of the way in which impact is delivered. So these 5 dimensions, they've been developed by an entity called the Impact Management Project, but they're well used across impact investing and other ways of operationalizing and measuring impact. And here's a set of questions, and this is a worksheet that's been developed that really focuses in and guides people to both ask and answer some of their impact questions surrounding long-term change. What kind of change are we aiming for? What short and medium-term outcomes are you aiming for? And we talked a little bit about those, and they appear in a theory of change. But then what unintended impacts might occur as well. And finally, what the existing research says about how to achieve the change. So are there benchmarks? Are there best practices? Is there research that can help either in the measurement tools that are used, or what can be expected, or how to go about um, really focusing on that change and how to go about articulating it. So this is also, this particular slide is a preview of the tool that I'm going to make available at the end of the session, that you can all take away with you and use in your own settings. This can also serve as a worksheet to, as I said, help you work through some of these questions, the different dimensions of impact, and how to go about measuring them. I just wanted to pop up a final slide before I go there. Just wanted to thank everyone. Really appreciate your participation today. Wanted to stress that if there's further work that you'd like to do, or information, or even just sort of chatting about this, I've listed some of my contact information there. And through the Impact Institute, I'm also available for coaching, whether it's one-on-one or team coaching. Look out for some online learning opportunities early in the new year, the new calendar year, and stay tuned for further webinars like today. I'm going to try to offer them free of charge periodically, so that people can come out and chat and really explore something that they might not have thought about previously, or in a different way. So Jen, I wonder if you can put us back onto the gallery before we sign off, so that we can just see everyone off, and I can thank everyone for participating, and it was great to see you all.